Hello, everyone, and welcome to LDM Radio Sports Talk, the sports show that talks about sports and other topics relatable to sports fans. Joining me this week from a remote location is Scott Blander.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me, Alfonso. I do appreciate the invite.
All right, so there was an interesting development over the NHL within the last 72 hours or so. There was a huge stretch of, for local news, it was I don't even know how to describe it. It was just an insane turn of events, and we're gonna start from what happened Monday night. So Monday night around 8:30 or so, the NHL, so the Washington Capitals were playing the New York Rangers in Madison Square Garden, and there was a play that developed with Tom Wilson, who's a forward for the Washington Capitals. He ended up there was a scrum in front of the net where Pavel Buchnevich was trying to stuff in a loose puck, and he ended up falling down, and Tom Wilson ended up having his stick under his head, kind of like sandwiched on top of him, and then he gives him a punch on the back of the head with his hockey glove on. And this turns into a huge melee where Rangers are pretty much trying to fly on the back of Tom Wilson, and it looks like one of those like David versus Goliath things where like there's just a bunch of guys like trying to jump on Wilson, and he's just throwing him off, and then he ends up grabbing Artemi Panarin, which is the stud New York Rangers forward, ends up pretty much grabbing him and slamming him up and down into the ice. Kind of, it was like more of like a WWE kind of like scene there, and he ends up injuring him and getting him out of the game, and he's actually out for the season now. So Tom Wilson, there's regular hockey plays and regular hockey scrums, but this one went to the next level, and it was just it was a pretty crazy scene of events. Scott, what do you have for us on this?
Yeah, and like you mentioned a few minutes ago, Capitals fans are rushing to defend this guy, just like my Bruins fans are rushing to defend Marchand. There's quote unquote hockey plays, hockey scrums, but one thing I said today to a Capitals fan, when you've got his history, and we'll get into that later, but when you've got his history, you lose the benefit of the doubt for the quote-unquote hockey play or scrum. And honestly, whether he had history or not, what he did, he like you said, he had his glove on. Buchnevich was face down on the ice. Buchnevich is, 110 pounds? Face down on the ice. Wilson is punching him with the glove on, mashing his head into the ice. And then when Panarin, people that are defending Wilson are saying Panarin jumped on his back. Well, Panarin's also 110 pounds soaking wet. And he threw him off, and then he body slammed the guy, and he continued to hit him. So, nah, absolutely not. No way is this a hockey play. And again, any benefit of the doubt is gone when you look at this guy's history. I mean, this is what he does. Yeah. So no, it's not a hockey play at all.
Yeah, it was a situation where the Rangers basically did all they could, but there was just one man who was just an absolute wrecking crew, and he just pretty much wrecked through the Rangers that were on the ice that were trying to challenge him. It was an interesting development for many reasons, and one of the most interesting developments from actual Monday night itself. There's a lot of different layers into this onion of what happened with this entire situation. But as far as Monday goes, he ends up serving, 12 or 17 minutes, and then he ends up coming back and scoring the empty net goal to seal the game. So the New York Rangers, to sum up their involvement in this, Buchnevich tried to score a goal. He ended up falling down. Wilson pummels him, and then from that point, the Rangers really didn't do anything else other than try to defend Buchnevich while they were on the ice. So the Rangers did absolutely nothing, no counter retaliation. They just pretty much took the loss. They took everything. They actually took the empty net goal that he scored, and it was just, let's see what happens. Let's see what happens with the front office. So, any last thoughts on what happened just Monday night before we move on to the next stage?
Yeah, and the Rangers' lack of toughness is definitely a problem. Obviously, we'll get to round two where they decided they didn't want to get pushed around anymore. But the fact that there's no response and there's nothing they could have done. And obviously, we got a lot to cover with management and the moves made. I was a huge Brendan Lemieux fan because I've always been a fan of that type of player. The quote unquote agitator, the guy who plays with an edge. I have his jersey. He was my favorite player on the team. We lost that now. Wilson probably would have pummeled him, but it would have been a fair drop the gloves, let's go. And that's how, whether you win or lose the fight is irrelevant, really. Somebody had to fight him. We don't have anybody even remotely close who could do that with him. And the Rangers didn't respond well. They did not respond well at all. And yeah, him getting the empty netter was just icing on the cake.
And you wonder here at this point, on this Monday night scene, if there was a situation where was David Quinn telling the team not to do anything, or was doing anything, or like was it just like a team mantra not to retaliate at this point? Because I feel like for the past couple of years, especially in the like after Tortorella days, like when we started with the Alain Vigneault days. That's when the New York Rangers kind of started their softening up on like the super hardcore, like don't retaliate on every play. Do you feel like it was a management's decision not to do anything right there on Monday night, or was it just the players or the flow of the game? What do you think?
Well, I think it's management's decision to not give us the personnel to be in a situation to defend themselves and to stand up for their guys and the team. And you hit it right on the head. This has been a problem since the AV days. Obviously, a Tortorella team was not going to get pushed around, but AV got fired. You had guys coming out. I don't remember who. I want to say Zuccarello, but don't quote me on that. You had guys coming out and saying, he told us not to retaliate. He told us not to hit back. This has been happening. This is not new to the Quinn administration, if you will. This has been happening. The toughness has been a problem for years with this team. And we lost D'Angelo. We lost Brendan Lemieux. So whether or not Quinn told them not to do anything or the decision came from management, who knows? But we just don't have the personnel.
So we Scott and I are both Rangers fans, but we are going to try to look at this from a neutral standpoint. And if you're a Washington Capitals fan, you're seeing there, and you see your one guy, he's kind of just throwing Rangers left and right, and they're just kind of pelting off of him. He's just grabbing one, almost like WWE power driving this Panarin into the ice. I mean, it was just. So you're basically, you're feeling like a tough guy. You're like, yeah, like this, our one guy could beat up pretty much the whole Rangers team, and the Rangers are soft, and they didn't do any kind of retaliation. And this is also what the whole league is seeing. Like the league is seeing that there's one guy who came in, and it's not even like one of your top, like goonish kind of things as far as like from a standpoint where all he can do is be a fighter or a quote unquote enforcer. He's an actual hockey player who is also able to get down and dirty and takes it to the next level and takes it too far mostly, but he's still able and effective. So you have this one guy just pretty much tearing through an entire team, and you got to be feeling pretty good about that if you're a Washington Capitals fan, I'd imagine. I did talk to a few of them. A couple of them didn't exactly agree with what Wilson did, but then there's other ones, floating around social media, and just how could you not if he's on your team? You have that bravado, like like our one guy knocked over a whole team.
Yeah, most Capitals fans, they're like, because I haven't gone to school in Maryland. I'm actually real friends, not just on Facebook with a decent amount of Capitals fans, and I've been trying to get. I was on the phone with one about an hour ago, trying to get their perspective. The ones that are the true hockey fans, the ones that I consider the true knowledgeable hockey fans, they weren't throwing the guy under the bus as much as I would like. But yeah, they are throwing shades of, yes, we love what he can do. Maybe tone it down a little bit. See, my frustration, I'm yeah, people love throwing the term, he's old school hockey. They love throwing that term around. Look, I'm old school hockey. I'm 44. I love old school hockey. I love, hitting, fighting. I've always been a fan. Lemieux is my favorite player. I grew up with Chris Nyland, Knuckles Nyland in the late 90s, of course. Joey Koser, guys like that. I love that. I don't think fighting should be taken out of the game. Here's a perfect example of why fighting cannot be taken out of the game. So I love all that. But, I can't stand dirty. I hate it. I was like, people are comparing him to Sean Avery. I don't even think they're even close to comparable because Avery, was the attitude, sure. Avery wasn't looking to end guys' careers on every shift. And I, as a Ranger fan, I was the first to say I was not a huge fan of Sean Avery or the way he played the game. But that being said, again, he wasn't trying to injure players. So you've got guys like Tom Wilson, Brad Marchand, and the most frustrating part about these guys is they're really good. They're really talented. My Caps friend Mike that I was talking to today said, Wilson kind of came into the league as a goon, but just really developed a great game, and he's a solid part of that team. And I agree from a talent standpoint. And Marchand, of course, is a Hart Trophy candidate more or less every year. So when you're that good, you don't have to play that way. And I'm sick and tired of hearing, plays with an edge. He's a spark plug. That doesn't work for when you're dirty.
So as far as Monday night goes, we have our situation. We have it. It already had played out. And what most of the NHL is thinking is, okay, so this is Tom Wilson, who has a huge rap sheet. He's going to get suspended or have some kind of discipline. So you have the information on exactly who bad boy Tom Wilson is, right?
I do, yeah. You want that now? You want me to run down the list?
Absolutely. So before we get to the suspension, so suspension's up in the air, and nothing has happened yet. But this is what the NHL knows of Tom Wilson at this point after Monday.
Yes. This is the list. I was compiling this. I wasn't lying when I told you it took me over an hour to compile it. Here's what we got. His first infraction, December 17th, 2013, a major and an ejection for boarding Braden Shen of the Flyers. April 21st, 2015, charging penalty for a high hit on Wisniewski of the Islanders, knocked him out with a concussion. December 10th of that year, 15, ejection for boarding Panthers Brian Campbell. 6 days later, couldn't even go 6 days, couldn't go 1 week. 6 days later, a match major, and for anybody who doesn't know, a match penalty is an intent to injure. There's 5-minute majors for fighting, of course. There's a 5-minute high stick. Match major is when the referee decides that was a dirty play. You tried to injure him and throw him out of the game. Now, here's the best part about this. So they gave him a match major and an ejection for a hit to the head of the Senators' Curtis Lazar. The NHL, 36 hours later, rescinded the major. So they didn't. I've never heard of this in my life. I've never heard of this happening. 36 hours later, the NHL rescinded the match major because apparently, and don't quote me on this, but I think a match major is an automatic suspension. Like the bare minimum, I think he would have had to have been suspended for 1 game. I think. Don't quote me on that. I'll look that up later. I've never heard of that happening in my life. They rescinded it. Moving on, April 1st, 2016, dirty hit on Nikita Zadorov of Colorado, gave him a concussion. 29 days later, on the 30th, $2,900 fine for a knee-on-knee hit on Connor Sheary of the Penguins. December 31st, New Year's Eve. Hit from behind on Devils John Moore, sent him to the hospital with a concussion. John Moore missed 17 games. Preseason, this guy can't even play clean in preseason. September 22nd, 2017, 2-game suspension for a dirty hit on Robert Thomas of the Blues. 8 days later, also in the preseason, major and an ejection and a 4-game suspension for boarding Sammy Blias of the Blues. This guy's got something against the Blues, apparently. April 12th, 2015, playoffs now, Game 1 against Columbus, charging penalty on Alexander Wenberg. No hearing because, and I quote, the NHL decided there was no definite or definitive camera angles that show the main point of contact. Meaning, in 2015, in this day and age, with everything being HD, 4K, the NHL decided there was no definitive camera angle, so they couldn't tell if the main point of contact was the head or the shoulder, so they didn't even give him a hearing. You cannot make this up. April 29th, also playoffs. Game 2 against Pittsburgh. Elbow to the head of Brian Dumoulin. No, I don't know if there was any penalty or whatnot. Definitely wasn't hearing. Also in the playoffs, May 1st, 2015. Game 3, 3-game suspension for a hit to the head on Zach Aston Reese. Gave him a concussion and a broken jaw. Then he kept his nose clean for a couple years. And then 2018, September 20th, back to the preseason. Match major and ejection for a blindside hit on the Blues. Oscar Sundqvist. This guy's definitely got something against the Blues for some reason. 20-game suspension in preseason. Finally, the NHL came down on this guy. Got it knocked down to 14 on an appeal. Then he kept his nose clean for another couple years. March 5th, 2021, 7-game suspension for a dirty hit on Brandon Carlo. And that brings us to Monday night. So, I mean, this guy's got plenty of suspensions. He's already gotten a 7-game suspension. And the league decided they didn't want to do anything about it. I don't know what. Same with Marchand. I don't know what maybe it's because Wilson plays for Ovi and Marchand. Marchand doesn't. I was going to, for some reason, I was going to say Penguins, but no, I don't know why the NHL Department of Player Safety, and I put that in quotes because it is an absolute joke. The NHL has no intentions of removing dirty hits to the game, dirty hits to the head. Players that are out there trying to hurt people. I mean, you gave the guy a 20-game suspension 3 years ago, a 7-game suspension just 2 months ago, and he gets away without a suspension for this.
Okay, so that brings us to Tuesday, where it was deemed that there was no suspension for Tom Wilson, and it was just a $5,000 fine, which is the most allowed for any kind of fine. So, where I could see that there was no suspension was from an objective standpoint. I didn't see like a smoking gun, like, okay, this is something that you could definitely suspend them for, because there's scrums and there's like different things that happen. It was a whole bunch of almost injuries, almost bad situations, but it didn't really get to that exact point where there was a definitive blatant action. It was just a whole bunch of almost actions. It was a whole bunch of almost tragic instances, but it wasn't anything that was just like, okay, this is it. Like, this is a suspendable thing. So you really couldn't suspend them for the whole act. I think everybody was assuming, and I was expecting something, but I wasn't exactly shocked that the NHL didn't do anything either, because it was just, there wasn't no smoking gun in this situation to warrant that. But with the extensive history that Scott just went through, everybody pretty much who wasn't a Capitals fan expected something to happen. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, obviously Ranger fans were going absolutely ballistic. Oh, give him 50 games, whatever. Sorry. So yeah, you're right. The hit wasn't the most dirtiest things I've ever seen. Now, when I first saw it, I was thinking like, well, he's got to be done for the year, including playoffs. And then, yeah, after watching it repeatedly, you're absolutely right. It wasn't the dirtiest thing in the world. However, the NHL absolutely dropped the ball when you have to give them one game, strictly because they're playing each other on Wednesday. You know, the NHL is, talking out of the left side of their mouth saying we're trying to get fighting out of hockey. And they are. The NHL is trying to get fighting out of hockey. They've tightened up the rules, hits that were legal in the 80s, 90s. I've been bringing up Scott Stevens a lot because, even though he was a Devil, he's one of my favorite players that wasn't, not Rangers, because he was that killed people. But for the most part, he did it legally. cleanly for the most part.
It was legal back then, so it passes.
What's that? You broke up there a second.
It was legal back then, so it passes.
Oh yeah. Um. Yeah. So and most of his hits in the '90s wouldn't be legal now, but the two teams are, so on one hand they're saying, oh well, we're trying to protect the players, we're taking a lot of hits out of the game, we're trying to protect, hits to the head and whatnot, trying to get fighting out of the game, and then you've got the two teams playing each other 2 days later. You know what's going to happen, like just common sense. So now it's not even necessarily about the hit. Common sense dictates just give him one game. How can you possibly if you're the NHL, let him be in the lineup for Wednesday's game when the two teams are playing each other?
Absolutely.
The NHL just drops the ball every time they have it. It's unbelievable.
So it just absolutely turned into a bad situation from that point forward. Like, again, my perspective is I was not surprised that something wasn't levied, but since there was the past history and one specific person, then I think there definitely should have been something. If it was, I think, any other player, just a regular somebody from another team, like it's not as big of an issue, other than like maybe like a Brad Marchand or another like high profile, kind of bad boy, quote unquote. If it was just like your regular goon or something like that, it wouldn't be that big of a deal, or to this extent. But this is where we are right now, and the fact that the players there was an actual game happening between the same two people made an extra layer of this extra crazy. So before we get to the actual game itself, there was the New York Rangers came out publicly with a statement. Usually these things happen. It kind of just like they prepare a statement, they throw it out on social media. They have it for political views, they have it for when somebody passes, from the organization and different things like that. That's not an uncommon thing to happen, a statement from the team. But what was uncommon was the actual statement that the Rangers made. So I don't have it in front of me, the whole thing. I'll just paraphrase for timing wise. But they basically said that they did not agree with the ruling that Tom Wilson is basically a goon and he just was super violent in this exchange, and that the player safety chief George Parros should be relieved of his duties. So that was very clear at the end, and they actually said George Parros should be fired, basically right at the end. The actual statement itself. Well, what do you think of this statement as a whole, just as the statement itself?
I think the statement was fantastic. I think, it was very, very gutsy. It's something you don't see in that context. You don't see ever, really. I kept seeing, unprecedented on every media outlet I saw that posted it. They kept calling it unprecedented. A lot of Islanders and Devils fans said, "Good for them." Good for them for taking a stand there. So I do like the actual statement, and I'm sure you'll lead into the chaos that's ensued as a result.
Yeah. So just absolute craziness. I think the statement was actually bold and really unprecedented. I think it was. I thought it was great myself as a New York Ranger fan, but as a professional and in these kind of moments, it was just kind of one of those things that that's what everybody was thinking, but it's not exactly what everybody says or what you say publicly. Like they just pretty much went through the filters and they were just like, what, we're just gonna throw it out there because we don't care, basically. It was you could feel the frustration from the Rangers organization. Now, where was this frustration coming from? And that leads us into the next segment of what ended up happening. Was in a super shocker move hours after the statement. Well, the next day when the statement was released, the New York Rangers ended up announcing the firing of team president John Davidson and general manager Jeff Gordon. So, for those who don't know, the team president Davidson was promoted. He was hired in the offseason last year, and he was an old New York Rangers player around the 70s, and he was a longtime broadcaster for the team. So very beloved, very enamored with the team. The team's history from the past. And then Jeff Gordon has been with the team since about 2015-16. He ended up getting hired, took over a complete mess of a Rangers organization when it comes to their financial constraints and long-term bad contracts and depleted farm system because they traded away a lot of their first-round picks to make that final push for the Stanley Cup finals. In those years that they were pretty good in the early 2000s. So Scott, well, what do we make of the Rangers firing these two gentlemen?
I don't know what to make of it. Well, my opinion is I'm furious. I'm livid. I don't understand it. Both of these guys, like you just said, Gordon came in an impossible situation. He came in a team that needed to be ripped up and rebuilt from the ground up. I know this is New York. New York, nobody likes to use the term rebuild, but in a salary cap league, you can't go from what they had. They had a nice run from 2012 to 2016, maybe 17. We'll call it 17. But like you said, with those ridiculous contracts, the depleted farm system, it was over. And in a salary cap league, you can't just turn that, undo what you have on the ice and put a contender route back on the ice in 2 years. It just can't be done. And, again, being New York, nobody wants to face that reality, but that's what it was. So Gordon got hired into an impossible situation. I think he's he's a magician, really. Unloading the great draft picks he got for Nash, Nick Holden. Can't believe he got anything for him, but he unloaded these big contracts. He unloaded the dead wood. He loaded up with prospects, draft picks. He drafted well, I think. I thought it was coming together. I mean, JD just got hired. I mean, in the middle of the rebuild. At least Gordon came on, at the tail end of the playoff run, and it was decided he had to do the rebuild. Olin seemed to have no problem with it at the time. JD got hired in the middle of the rebuild. So we'll never know the truth. Something stinks. There's a rumor, and again, just rumor. I want to make that very clear. The rumor that Dolan was the one behind the statement, and I think JD and Gordon saw how powerful it was and saw repercussions coming from the league. So they kind of distanced themselves, and Dolan fired them as a result for not having his back. Very believable with what we know about Dolan. I mean, this is a guy that throws people out of Knicks games for if they don't like the T-shirt he's wearing that have his name on it. So. Yeah. That's certainly believable. I find it very difficult to believe that, he just got involved and said, I don't like how long this is taking. I mean, this is a guy that let Glenn Sather run the team into the ground for 2 decades. He's always been a very intrusive owner with the Knicks. He's been like the Jerry Jones kind of owner, but he's always been hands off with the Rangers. And now all of a sudden he wants to get involved and have the heavy hand. To a guy he just hired in the middle of the rebuild. I don't buy that. I don't.
Yeah, a lot of unfortunately, this is where the story really jumps off of the cliff because it doesn't make sense at all from this point. You have like I said before, you have the team president who was just entrenched in Rangers history. It's like, there's no removing him from the books or anything like that. And you have Jeff Gordon, who pretty much went through hell and back just to get the Rangers where they are right now, to even get them any kind of competitive with the buyouts and the bad contracts and all this other craziness. And now they get the boot, but it is somewhat believable to think that it came from James Dolan, and then now it's, like these guys weren't on board with it, so he ended up letting them go. There's the hothead factor where this was like kind of an instantaneous thing, but this might have been cooking for a while. There's a lot of stuff that we won't end up knowing because we don't know what the day-to-day business is like for the Rangers organization between these gentlemen. And it's kind of like who do you believe? Do you believe the rumors? Like they're they could be just be throwing him out there for whoever satisfaction. Like maybe it was like Davidson and Gorton's people to try to save face and get a future job in the future, or it could have been Dolan trying to slander these two guys to get there's a whole bunch of different things that we will never know. But the sad part is that this actually happened, and we have a guy in Jeff Gordon who spent 5 or 6 years doing magic work, doing stuff that many have tried to do and failed, and just getting this team to where it is right now, to where it's like a step or two away from being elite. And he's gone now. And it's awful. It's just absolutely awful. And now, if you're a Capitals fan, and we're going to go back to the Capitals fan perspective here. So you have your guy, Tom Wilson, who not only beat up on like an entire Rangers team that's on the ice right now, he also throws a wrench into the whole organization and causes these two firings to happen right now. So, even if this was like something that might have waited until the end of the year or things like that, you never know what it's like in behind the scenes. But if you're a Capitals fan and Tom Wilson, you just basically wrecked this whole organization just by yourself. So this is what everybody's seeing. This is what the NHL is seeing. It's just actually it turned for the worse, and it got really, really ugly at this point.
Yeah, there's also the theory that Bettman called up Dolan and forced his hand. You got fined $250K today for the statement. Obviously, Bettman does not like. Bettman's got just as thin skin as Dolan does. So there's that theory. There's a bunch of theories. We'll never know what really happened. Whatever you want to believe, I think the one fact that we can all agree on is I think Dolan made a huge, huge mistake canning these two guys. Huge mistake. Huge.
John Davidson is a bit, I'd say he's a bit of a wild card because, he had like blueprints on the Blues and they ended up winning relatively soon. But then he was with the Blue Jackets, and the Blue Jackets kind of sold off everything they had to try to win a playoff series, and they won the actual one playoff series, and then that was it. And then they've been pretty mediocre ever since. So, John Davidson as an executive, we don't really know, outside of the popularity from him being an actual Ranger player and all the years of broadcasting, which is what fans really remember more than anything else.
Right.
But what we're looking bad here is the actual with Jeff Gordon, time and again, a lot of people that deal with this in their day-to-day lives. I've dealt with it personally where, you put so much work into an actual project or, this is basically Jeff Gordon's life's work. And, you think about the amount of hours that they've spent in here. Athletes, they spend hours, hours and hours on end training their bodies and working and doing things like that. Like general managers, they're pretty much working, I'd say, easily 70, 80 hours a week, if nights, weekends, overnights, trade deadlines, all these other things. I'm sure it's an impossible schedule to keep up with. And this is what he's done for the last 5 or 6 years, and right now he just basically is not even going to enjoy the fruits of his labor. And anybody who takes over, which has been announced to be former New York Ranger Chris Drury, taking over these two positions, anybody who takes over, this is Jeff Gordon's team for the next couple of years. This is not something that, Drury comes in and the Rangers, they end up having a winning season next year and it's all about Chris Drury. You know what I mean? This is the actual, still the blueprint of Jeff Gordon, and it will be for at least another 2 years, depending on how they go with their future moves. Just absolutely disgusting. In my opinion, it's just absolutely it's a total black eye, and the fact that one guy caused all of this mess is an absolute craziness. So.
Yeah. I thank God this was the Capitals and not the Islanders or the Devils. I mean, bad enough we got Capitals fans just chuckling at this. Could you imagine if this was the guy on the Islanders or the Devils that completely buried our franchise in a span of 24 hours?
Bad. I mean, it's to the point where right now I know like a bunch, like talking to different fans and different fan bases and stuff like that. Like there's actual Islanders fans and Devils fans that are, like on our side, and like Penguins fans that are just like, oh man, like F Tom Wilson, and you know what I mean? And then,
Yeah.
like and people who regularly hate the Rangers, they're just like they're on the Rangers side in this, and because of the list that you read off, there was a couple of Penguins instances and things like that. So it's not like a lot of their wrath has come from different organizations. So that brings us to the game last night. So actually, it was actually yesterday morning that all the firings happened and things like that. So the game last night, we had just fisticuffs flying all over the place. As soon as the puck dropped for the opening faceoff, there was 3 fights simultaneously in the first lines, and I think it was just littered with a bunch of people that don't normally fight. It was the Rangers' fourth line. I don't think there was an actual fighter on there. Maybe Kevin Rooney, who was the center. It was Philip DiGiuseppe on one wing and Colin Blackwell on the other wing. I mean, Colin Blackwell maybe gets a little gritty, but not anything to be afraid of or run home about. Carl Hagelin, former New York Ranger, on the other side, which they did not mention how Carl Hagelin was a former New York Ranger at any point on the telecast last night. So Carl Hagelin, was it Garrett Hathaway and Nick Dowd? So Nick Dowd and Galloway, Hathaway, they're probably some bangers, but very very crazy sequence in the front where it was just it wasn't like 3 heavyweight fights. It was just kind of like 3 guys just scrumming, and then well, what are your thoughts on what happened like at the beginning of last night?
Well, the Rangers did what they had to do. That is hockey 101. Anybody who, not a hockey fan who looked at that and was, jaw open, like, what is this? This is not a sport. They don't know the sport. This is exactly why you need fighting in the game. The Rangers were embarrassed on Monday. A guy was out of control when after their superstar, one of the best players in the league, and the Rangers didn't have an answer for it. They had an answer for it on Wednesday. This is exactly why you need fighting in the game. The Rangers wasted no time in standing up for themselves. Yeah, they don't have the toughest guys in the league, but you know what? That's hockey. They did what they had to do. They made a statement. You had the 3 fights right off the bat. There were more fights afterwards. It had to be done. That is hockey 101. So, that is old school hockey. Caps fans were throwing that term around with Tom Wilson. No, Tom Wilson is not old school hockey. Maybe 1970s minor league hockey, maybe. But what the Rangers did was old school hockey. They said, what happened Monday, like, you need to pay for that. You need to answer for that. You don't have to win those fights. You don't. I'll give you a perfect example. In 2012, when we played Ottawa, I was confused, James Neal and Chris Neal. I think it was Chris Neal.
Chris Neal, yeah.
Okay, so their enforcer, their fighter, but this guy was knocking, but he was doing it for the most part cleanly. That's the difference. He changed that series. The Rangers were the 1 seed. We should have had no problem with them. He changed that series, and they took a 3-2 lead because this guy was unstoppable. He was crushing people, and he was scoring goals. Brandon Prust, again, I love the agitator. Brandon Prust, who's not really in his weight class, finally dropped the gloves with him in Game 6 at Ottawa when we were losing. Dropped the gloves with him. He lost that fight, but it didn't matter. He made a statement. Team rallied behind him. We won Game 6. We won Game 7. So, you don't have to win the fight, but you have to have the fight in certain situations. And yesterday was absolutely one of those situations.
So here's one interesting angle that I haven't heard from anywhere. This is just kind of just me coming from like my own thoughts. Is maybe was there a chance that James Dolan, these firings were happening because maybe Dolan ordered that like they call up the gritty guys from the minor league system to come up for this game to just start whipping people's asses. Now that it's a plausible situation. Maybe Gorton was like no, and Davidson was like no because this is not going to according to plan, because obviously they have a plan. They have a plan that's been working steadily at this point, but they had a plan and they weren't ready to bring up these guys. But was there kind of a clash there? I think that's a plausible situation that could have happened, because I kept waiting yesterday afternoon, like morning into afternoon, because if they're gonna call up people for the game, it happens fairly early. So I was, just waiting for it, looking at your phone, looking at the news and things like that. And you don't hear the Rangers calling anybody up. So you're kind of just like, all right, well, if they're going to do something, they got to do it with the people they got. And the people they got aren't all that, intimidating, but they're going to go with what they got.
That is absolutely a realistic possibility. I don't know if that's necessarily worthy of firing the two guys, but there's definitely some weight to that in the fact that we just didn't have the tough guys. I mean, he acquired Brendan Lemieux, which, I told you was my favorite player on the team.
Yeah.
And then he got rid of him. And that was kind of a head scratcher to me. But I said, all right, you know what? If we keep hearing, like you keep saying, we've got a plan. Okay, fine. The plan was for the most part working. Brendan Lemieux was not replaced. Maybe the plan was to replace him in the offseason, but you don't need a goon anymore in this league, but you do need like a Lemieux or a Brandon Pruss, or or don't need a Tom Wilson, but you don't need a heavyweight, like a Colton Orr, Tony Twist. You don't need that, but you gotta have guys that can stand up for your for your stars, for your smaller players, and can throw their weight around. I know Tony D'Angelo is a very touchy subject, but he served a purpose, and not to mention he could rack up points, but he was a no nonsense tough guy. And
there's a lot of angles from people that were missing in these games. There was Chris Kreider obviously could have done some things. Well, imagine if Alexander Ovechkin, who's the captain of the Washington Capitals, been out with injury. If he was in these games, like who knows what kind of hell he could have caused. So just there's a whole bunch of different wrinkles in here. What ended up happening last night was 100 penalty minutes in the first period alone. It was 171 for the game, and it was something. It was like the most penalty minutes in like 5 years, and on Tom Wilson's first shift, Brandon Smith, who was one of the highlighted players of anybody who had anybody close to somebody who could have done something in this, as physicality wise, ends up making a beeline for Tom Wilson, and they end up, engaging in a fight. I wouldn't say Brandon Smith exactly won the fight. I don't even know if the Rangers actually won any of the fights. I think they, a couple of good punches here and there. Ryan Strome, who's a guy who never fights, he ended up fighting. It was just a very crazy scene last night. Any thoughts on that?
We definitely won the Hagelin fight. Blackwell definitely won the Hagelin fight. In fact, the announcer remarked he had him down. And here's the difference between, Tom Wilson and everybody else who's not Tom Wilson, is that he had him down on the ground and he actually had his fist in the air and he let it, he didn't hit him. He could have unloaded with a defensive player, face down on the ground, just like Tom Wilson did to Butch Nevis. He didn't do it. Let the refs come in. Separate. The announcer pointed that out. If you watch the highlights, you'll notice that. The Brendan Smith fight, it was more or less a draw, and that's a moral victory in itself because Brendan Smith, middleweight, Tom Wilson, heavyweight. That's give him. I'm not a Brendan Smith fan at all, to be honest with you. But I give him a lot of credit for that. Middleweight against the heavyweight. He held his own. That's all you can ask for. Nobody went down, didn't get knocked down, didn't get knocked out. He absolutely held his own, and that kudos to him. Absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, so to sum up, I don't think the New York Rangers really didn't have the guns to fight the fight that they needed to fight, but they did what they had to do, and they showed heart in engaging in these fights and what needed to transpire. So another thing that transpired last night was from the kind of the I guess the original victim of the first Tom Wilson Tom Wilson incident was Pavel Buchnevich. He ends up almost maybe cross-checking, punching uh, Washington Capitals forward Anthony Mantha in the head. Open ice hit. It was something of a dirty play. Take us through that.
It was definitely a dirty play, but you can't. I mean, Buchnevich is certainly not that type of player, and you can't really blame the guy for losing his cool. Given that you got Tom Wilson running around unchecked, you got the league basically saying Tom Wilson can do whatever he wants. So he lost his cool. Honestly, it's probably worthy of under normal circumstances. It's probably worthy of the 1-game suspension. These are certainly not normal circumstances, and I love what the Rangers did before the hearing. How they ruled him out for the last 2 games with a quote unquote undisclosed injury. That's basically saying, we don't care. It's basically saying like, oh, you can't fire me. I quit.
Yeah.
So they know he's going to get suspended, but before the ruling even came down, that was just the Rangers, giving an FU to the league and saying like, it doesn't matter if you suspend him, he's not playing anyway. So do whatever you want. We don't really care. I love that move by the Rangers.
In the Pavel Buchnevich incident specifically, I saw from pretty much the opening faceoff, he was trying to get into the groove of getting something done as far as the physicality and things go, but also still trying to play the game. He ended up taking 1 minor penalty, and then when he came out from that 2-minute penalty, ends up taking another minor penalty, which at this point was just a ticky-tack kind of like, why'd you even call that penalty? So the mark was on Buchnevich as far from where the officials were concerned. Now, the way I view this is, Mantha was coming after him, trying to, like hit him with the stick and, trying to egg him on to get something going there. And Buchnevich, after a while, was just like, you know what, here. And then he ends up just, hitting him across the head. It was definitely dirty, but it was a situation where the refs could have easily like jumped in there and then ended up like booting Buchnevich or giving him like a 10-minute, which they were giving out 10-minute misconducts like they were free T-shirts yesterday. So it was very plausible that could have happened. They could have just booted him from the game, and then there was nothing that could have been done. So Buchnevich ended up taking it upon himself to do something there, and a lot of Ranger fans support it. I support it. It was. I don't support the type of violence, but it was necessary, seeing how all the dominoes ended up falling.
Yeah, you can't blame some of these guys for losing their cool the way things went down over the past 3 days. I was a Ranger fan, but I'm an objective hockey fan. It was absolutely dirty. And like I said before, under normal circumstances, probably worthy of the 1-game suspension. We wouldn't have a leg to stand on. But given everything that's happened that facilitated that effect, I'm just saying good for him. Good for him. The Capitals brought this on themselves. They all did, all of them. I think I know that Ovechkin wasn't there, but I'm very disappointed in Laviolette as a coach for not reining this guy in, for not, make him a healthy scratch, or if the league wasn't going to suspend him for a game. Laviolette did absolutely nothing. Whoever, I don't know if anybody was wearing the C or an assistant captain for Capitals, like, you've got to rein this guy in. If he's, control your players. If the league won't do it, like, you have a responsibility as a captain or a coach, and very, very disappointing. I don't blame Buchnevich. Dirty play, sure. Not the most dirtiest thing not the dirtiest thing we've seen all week. But you can't blame him for losing his cool.
That basically the game ended up ending with the Capitals winning again. The score really didn't matter. The winning of losing of the fights really didn't matter. The Rangers pretty much were considered to be super soft and not capable of this kind of stuff, but they were pressed into action and they ended up answering the bell as best they could. So I think overall the Rangers showed the heart that they have, and the Capitals just end up moving on. And this will be in the rearview mirror in a couple weeks when they're actually in the playoffs. But like definitely, next season and seasons from here on out is going to be, Capitals versus Ranger games are going to be that much more crazy.
Yep, absolutely.
Right,
when we get good again, when we're back in a playoff team, this is going to be a rivalry renewed.
Yeah. So the New York Rangers, they ended up getting fined $250,000 for the statement. So that was just solely for the statement. So that ended up happening, and then Pavel Buchnevich ended up getting a 1-game suspension for the hit on Anthony Mantha yesterday, and that is what ended up transpiring. And it was just a really, really, really wild 72 hours.
Yeah.
So, all right. So that actually does it for our show this week. Thank you very much, Scott Blander, for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I will come by anytime you want me, bud.
All right. We'll see you next week. Thank you very much. LDM Radio Sports Talk.
I couldn't hear one word of that. I didn't hear anything you just said. Nothing. No sound. Oh, now I heard the laugh. Well, I'm sorry. You want to repeat that real quick?
Well, are we still on or no?
Oh.
Are we? Okay. Are we? Oh, all right. So, all right, we do it again. All right. So, thanks, Scott Blander, for coming on.